Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back, everyone. I'm gratified that nowadays people are okay saying that they're going to go see their therapist or talk to their therapist. You know, if you went back 20, 30 years, people would be afraid to admit that. Others might judge you thinking, all right, what's wrong with them? You know, or these two words, mental health. You say them, back in the day, a whole different picture, unfortunately, people would have. Question, how do you know that you need therapy? We're going to start there today with somebody who is behind a great center in Massachusetts. It's called New Beginnings, and they offer so many different types of therapy, from outpatient, in-home therapeutic, group therapy, school counseling. They work with a lot of school districts as well. And she is from that center. It's great to have her back with us. Sherri Alexandrovich joins us on the program. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Really good. Really good. And I'm glad we're talking about this. It's a lot of times people will stay away from therapy. Maybe it's a misconception. Maybe it's the thought of how it goes. Maybe it's the thought of being masked down and vulnerable. But what's the starting point there? How do you know that you should reach out to a therapist?
So that's a great topic for today, and I agree. I think that the stigma that used to be attached to therapy is certainly much less nowadays. I think that there's more people in therapy than not in therapy, rightfully so, or justifiably so. Honestly, I mean, people come to therapy for a variety of different reasons, and they can be something as going through a divorce, or transitioning to college, or having, a breakup with a relationship, or a new job, or struggling to get out of an abusive relationship. There's a multitude of different reasons why, people come to therapy. I think when you have that internal feeling that that something is not right, and it's important that you can be able to seek out and talk to people about what that is, or to seek help, or to get some guidance, regardless of kind of the depth of what it is that you're experiencing. One of the important things when you have kind of a trauma background, or something that's really happened in your lifetime that's pretty profound, it almost stays frozen. And if you don't go back and talk about it, it stays preserved in that, almost like that frozen state. So say you had this traumatic event at 15 and you never talked about it, and now you're, say, 55, 60. When you think about that event at 15, it's going to be just as fresh as it was when it happened, if you don't take it out of its, preservation and talk about it. Because it stays in that moment. And then every time that you have a trigger, or you experience something that has any level of association to that, you're going to be heightened, and it's going to feel like it's happening to you all over again. And that's one of the really big reasons I think that it's important to go back and process these life experiences. Because in this moment, right here and right now, you're safe, and it's not happening to you. But it feels like it's happening to you if you're just starting to now uncover it. And so I think that that's one of the really big reasons why it's important to kind of go back and talk about these things, because everything that's happened in our life, regardless how big, how small, negative, positive, it impacts us today. It impacts how we see things. It impacts the decisions that we make. It impacts what our next decision is going to be. And it doesn't always impact us in a positive way. Sometimes, we will avoid things out of fear, or we will not want to repeat things because we've had a negative experience about it. And we don't always have the opportunity to reframe that and make it a positive one. And so, if we don't go back and we don't talk about what that problem is or what that event was, it's going to kind of stay frozen in itself. And then you're always going to have that negative affiliation. So I think just for forward movement and to be able to process things, and to always be striving for our better self, that in itself is a really good reason why you should go to therapy.
Is it true that you might not even know or remember what happened at insert age, whatever it might be, 7, 15, whatever? You might not even be aware, but you get triggered or something happens in your adult life and you react in a certain way, but you don't know. It's, I want to say this with love. It's not your fault. You may beat
Right.
yourself up saying, I don't know what it is, why I can't, this happens and then I do this. I don't know why I do this. It could be from your childhood and something that
Mhm.
happened, big or small. Could be something
Right.
very insignificant to many, but
Mhm.
that could be sitting out there and you're not even aware of it, right?
Right. And so pre-verbal trauma, let's just talk about that for a minute. There are so many people who don't remember or have that pre-verbal trauma prior to the age of 2, prior to the age of 3. Now
Wow.
you don't have those memories, but what you do have is the body sensations. I don't know if anyone's ever read the book, The Body Keeps Score. Our bodies don't forget, our minds don't forget. So we have
Mm,
that experience that's inside of us. If we were neglected, if we weren't taken care of when we were first born, if we stayed in our cribs and we cried for hours, if our first experience with a parental figure or a caregiver was a negative experience, at 13, at 15, at 20, at 25, we're not going to understand exactly why we're having these sensations or why we have this aversion to a specific topic or a specific situation. But our bodies know, our bodies understand it. And so that's always something that's really important to keep in mind whenever we have something that we're like, that just doesn't feel right, or that doesn't seem like that's supposed to. So there's kind of a saying that when our responses are disproportionate to the event, that should be one of the first signs for us to say, I wonder why. That's kind of like that
mm.
moment where you want to say, okay, well, should I have responded that um in that manner? Was this situation really warranted how angry I get? No, granted, we all have bad days. There's all situations that come up. Sometimes, we didn't get enough sleep, we were sick. Yes, there are things like that happen. But I think for the most part, internally, we know, when you're responding a certain way or there's a certain specific thing in a relationship that just triggers you and you're like, well, I don't know why I get so upset about that. That doesn't seem to make sense. Sometimes if you can just kind of do some sequencing and tie that back and just kind of figure out, well, I wonder when the first time that I felt that way was, or I wonder where that comes from. Typically, you can tie it back to an event of why you're responding the way that you are and be able to do some inner child work or some trauma work to kind of figure out what it is that's going on. Because sometimes you can't articulate it. I mean, if you don't have that memory, you don't really understand why you're responding a certain way or why something is triggering you.
Well, you say
Does
typically
that?
you can connect it, but if it goes back to
Mhm.
pre-verbal, like we're talking here, could be 2 years old, um, you might not remember it. So there, yeah,
No.
you got to go a little bit deeper. And as
Mhm.
I'm learning, this stuff gets into the cellular level. I mean, it's in that stuff you experience as a child. It's not just in your brain, your subconscious. It's in your cells. Same thing with dealing with stress. It's not just my stomach is bothering me because you're stressed out or your head's bothering. You keep at it. It gets into your body in every
Mhm.
shape and every level, right?
And even if you try to, dismiss it from your brain, your body doesn't let you do that. Right? Hence
Mm,
the body keeps score.
yeah.
So your body will start to give you warning signs. You'll get upset stomachs. You'll start to, have some anxiety when you're in certain situations, or you develop, GI issues or ulcers, or your insomnia. You're not able to sleep, and you don't really understand where or why that's coming from a specific place. but it's coming from somewhere. And that in itself is worth exploring, even if you don't understand or have that affiliation to the memory itself. Just knowing that your body is having an adverse reaction to something, that in itself is worth taking a look at, because our bodies know sometimes even when our minds don't.
Yeah. And again, why don't we identify, we talked about age 2. I've even heard
Mhm.
birth trauma. Being born
Yeah.
could present a trauma within you that you take with
Mhm.
you for the rest of your life as an adult. And again, you're not even realizing it. But being born is traumatic. Let's be honest, you know?
It really is. And I was, so I recently got trained in EMDR, which is a specific trauma type of a therapy that uses eye movement in order to kind of help you through specific trauma events. And so I've trained, not myself, but I've gotten my providers trained. Last year there was 4 or 5 of us, and then this year there's another 5 that are being trained. In addition to that, I did some EMDR therapy for myself back in December and into January. And part of what we did, because I have my own, trauma background, and where we started was what's called a SPEC scan. And so in that SPEC scan, what you're doing is it's a type of therapy where you're going back and you're envisioning what is it that you were feeling even prior to being born. And it's an interesting type of therapy. And so for me, without even thinking, when we were doing this EMDR, the first question is she's kind of setting up, it's a whole type of therapy. You don't, just ask the question, what is the first thing that you could envision being a spec? And there's a script that goes with that. And without even hesitation, my response to that was chaos. And that's exactly what I could have envisioned the pregnancy like with my mother, given her mental illness and the variety of things that she was dealing with, was just chaos. And
Wow.
I could feel that in my body without even really having an attachment to it, or obviously not even having a memory for it. But
How did you
it's
know?
interesting how far back this comes from. I'm sorry?
How did you know to go back that far? That's pretty far.
Well, so I didn't. I was not the therapist. I was the patient. So my therapist in that moment, I know of my past, and I went because there were some things that I felt were important for me to kind of go back and work through, and different stages of your life. You want to remember certain things differently, or you want to be able to go back and uncover, or there are just some things that you're still triggered by that, maybe you weren't ready to deal with at 15, that you're ready at 40 or 55 or whatever, name the age. But so while I was doing my own EMDR, she kind of, this is just where she took me. And I had about 6 or 7 different sessions with her. And we didn't start with the SPEC scan, but that's where we ended up, because when you're doing this type of EMDR treatment, your brain takes you where your brain is going to go. It doesn't really matter. The clinician is the facilitator, but your subconscious is going to take you down that path on where it wants to go or where it remembers. And, you just have to make sure that the person in front of you is really trained and they're going to be able to guide you through that. That's a really important element. But I mean, it's an indescribable experience, and it's one that you don't really have any control over where your brain is going. So when you get to this SPEC scan type of, the session in the EMDR, now I've done that with other people who have not had that level of trauma, and their experience during that SPEC scan was very, very different. So it's an interesting root cause to why you want to go in certain areas, or why it's important to go back and uncover certain things.
Wow. Um, you went back for a reason. Your body was saying, your mind was saying, yeah, we got to go back. We got to go back.
Yeah.
And I guess the practitioner picked up on that.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it was, I'll tell you, it was probably some of the most intensive therapy I've ever had in my entire life.
Wow.
But unquestionably the most effective. I mean, I didn't end up being able to uncover the memories that I had hoped that I could have. However, I did get to the place in my life where I do have some closure, and out of that, I started writing a book. And interestingly, I named the book The Spec because for me, that's kind of where it started. So I've been kind of chipping away at this book. I don't know what I'm going to ever do with it, but for myself, it's just these thoughts that come up and through my own kind of journeys of why I do what I do, or, kind of written from a therapist perspective as well. I mean, we all have things that we deal with in our life. And I think the perception is that if you do this for a living, you have all the answers. We don't have all the answers for ourselves. I mean, we have a much better indication when we're not dealing with what we're going through, obviously, because it's not as personal, but it's always an important journey to go backwards, because we all have things that are kind of out there waiting for you to pick apart and figure out and reframe. Or even if you think about how we process our memories, right? I mean, what we think we remember at 5 or 6 and what we're really remembering can also be very different. And that's why it's important that you have somebody that's really skilled that can guide you through that, because you don't want your memories going in a direction that you don't want them to go in. But it's important to really be able to go back and reframe that, because I mean, if you think about teenagers, right, what they hear when a parent is talking, I need you to go do the dishes, I need you to do this, you give them a list of things, they hear 3 of those things. And then you say, well, how come we didn't get the dishes done? Oh, I didn't hear you say that. And so that's because they're not really listening. And so that's just kind of a good example of why it's important to just maybe come back and have those conversations or reframe those. And I know that's a silly example, but I
Not
was
at
just
all.
trying to keep it in a neutral place. It's because not everybody's listening all the time or hearing all the time. And then that person gets upset and they're like, well, I didn't hear you say that. Or, it feels like you're angry with me about that. And I am forever saying to my grandson, he's 10 and I've adopted him. So he's been with me since he's been 3 weeks old. And of course, being raised by a therapist, even my own daughter will tell you, it's, we're going to talk about that. Well, she's 33. She's still like, oh my goodness, Mom, really? Let's talk about that, because there's so much room for miscommunication. And if your feelings get hurt and you don't clarify why your feelings are hurt, sometimes you can go a decade thinking that somebody said or did something intentionally when it wasn't. And I know that we're kind of taking this in a different direction, but it all goes back to communication. And that's why it's so important. And that's kind of the key to therapy, is communication and learning what are those communication skills and the importance of clarification. And I think that some people just don't want to talk about things, or, certain cultures don't want to dive into certain communications, or the men, not all men want to talk about things. Why do we have to talk things to death? Well, the only way that we can move forward is to talk about why we're feeling the way that we're feeling today. It doesn't have to be an hour conversation. It can be just a simple clarification that can then start a whole new conversation of more positivity.
It's awareness. It's an eye opener. I appreciate your transparency. It speaks volumes. Here you are, created this amazing center helping so many people, so many school districts, children, adults, everywhere in every different shape and form. But you're still learning yourself on how to help others as you help yourself. And I mean, what you just said runs deep. Like, whoa. I've heard about birth trauma and things like that. Never really fully understood it until today. But that realization, and last night I was with, I'm in a group, a men's group. We do like a lot of leadership and community service. But we also, we'll go a little bit deeper, shadow work. So to your point here of the awareness, the realization, it was 12 questions somebody threw out last night. We had a journal in front of us, and we're just, it's like maybe 8 of us in the room. And they were just kind of basic questions. Well, maybe, what are you embarrassed to share with others? That kind of thing. Call it in there, that wheelhouse. I realized as I went through these questions that out of 12, 3 or 4 just can't remember exactly, don't have it in front of me, connected to my father. And
Mm-hmm.
my father didn't have the closest relationship. Parents got divorced when I was very young. He passed suddenly when I was in my low 20s. And I look now, I'm very much like him now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't realize those questions, and I wasn't trying to answer him that way, but it came up to him. So I probably have stuff floating out there I need to resolve because it was so far ago when he passed. And, you kind of put that to the side. That's not in your face part of your life at this moment. But it's probably just like you discovered those things in working with that practitioner.
Right, right, right. It's important. Everything impacts us, whether
Yeah.
it's positive, negative. Every experience that we have impacts us. Every person in our life impacts us. But the wonderful thing about that is we get to decide how it impacts us. We get to decide what we're going to do with that next. I say this a lot, the what's next. And that's really what's important, because what we did yesterday or what we did even an hour ago doesn't have to be what we do tomorrow, doesn't have to be what we do in 5 years from now. Everything are stepping stones, and everything that we do, New Beginnings, the name for it in itself had a lot of thought behind, why I came up with that name, and building blocks to a brighter future. That's on my website, and that is so true. Everything that we do is a building block, and just because we repeat something doesn't mean that we lost everything that we've built. And, I had a session recently, and the client was feeling really regressed she was triggered, something came up. She was feeling really down on herself. And, my response to that is, so you're telling me you've lost 2 years worth of coping skills because we regressed in this one area. And so just as I was kind of challenging that thought, she was able to really see that, well, wait a minute. No, I didn't really lose all of those coping skills. Today, I'm having a triggered response or trauma response to something. And we spent over an hour just processing through it. And at the end of it, we were really able to see that these things are going to happen. We're always going to have moments in our life that come back and trigger us. And to be able to just know that we can just pull out that toolbox, add a few more coping skills into it. And guess what? Now we can just have that forward movement, and we can be able to handle this item that comes up.
Sure.
Because if you've not experienced it before, how do you know you can handle it?
Absolutely. And, it's been said that we are here to learn and teach. So when I hear
Right.
on your website, building blocks, that's the learning, because one block gets you to the next, to the next, to the next. And you can't fix any of this stuff unless you learn about it. That's why we're talking about it today. Sherri, how do we find you? How do we connect with you? If somebody's looking for any kind of therapy, has questions about anything that you do, what we're talking about today, how do we find you?
So the website is New Beginnings Wellness Center, and where we have a Facebook page. We also have a website. I think it's newbeginningswc.com is our website. We also have 508-754-1141 is the main line. You can call and make a referral for intake, or you could do it right on our website as well. Our website also has, what insurances that we take, the services, the programs that we offer, our emails, my email's up there on the clinical page. And then there's the referral page as well, where you can make a referral right on the website there.
Thank you so much for today. Learned
You're
a lot,
welcome.
validated a lot, reinforced things that I've heard, and I'm sure others. And again, I really have to say it once more. Thank you for your transparency coming from you, knowing, a couple of months ago, you were going through that, a different type of therapy to learn how you can help others, but also yourself to have a realization.
Right.
Super cool. And I really appreciate it. Thank you again.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes?
How could he do this to you? And for Sheila, she has split ends.
B, console her?
Oh, sweetie, this is going to happen a lot. 4, maybe 5 more times before you get married.
C. Take charge.
Got to get this all straightened out. Give a little talking to, man to man, mano a mano. Hey, Steve! Is now a good time? No? Okay, no problem. Bye.
Or D. Help her find a new boyfriend.
I know a great place to meet boys. The internet. Nice, single boys. Never mind. How about some ice cream?
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.